Work. Okay, and we are live. Welcome everyone to Monday Meets. This is the Willow's weekly or sometimes bi-weekly opportunity to meet with staff, partnership agencies, and folks from around the community and talk about local issues, the Willow itself, and the programs that it has. I'm Will Averill. I'm the Director of Communications. I'm very excited to have Kathryn and Kathy with us today. I'll let them introduce themselves in just a second. But before we get started, I just wanted to say that you are watching a Facebook Live. If you have any questions, you can feel free to put them in the comments section below. If you are feeling like you would rather not use your name or would rather ask the question anonymously, you can email me. My email is waverill@willowdvcenter.org. And I'll put that in the comments below as well. If you are in need of assistance or you need to talk about anything that you have seen or heard here, please call our 24-hour hotline at 785-843-3333. We do have trained advocates on staff 24 hours a day to help talk you through that. But thank you, Kathryn and Kathy, for joining me today. We're going to talk a little bit about the women's movement in Lawrence and also the kind of the Willow's place in it if that comes up through the course of the conversation. But I'd like to start by, if you don't mind, just introducing yourselves and a little bit of background, about your experience.
Kathy, why don't you go ahead?
All right. Kathy Rose Mockery, she, her, hers. And I came to Lawrence from Los Angeles. So I'm a West Coast person that gradually has adjusted to snow, although I still don't like it. And came here in KU, imagining I'd be here a year, and here I am many, many years later. I worked after I got my bachelor's from KU in music therapy, and after a little while I decided a master's would be useful. Came back to KU because I had such a good academic experience here my first time around. Worked in residence life with the actual Mrs. E. I got to work with her when I was director of Lewis Residence Hall. And when I finished my master's, went back out to LA because the sunshine called me, and was fortunate to work in the UCLA Women's Resource Center for close to 15 years. It was a wonderful experience, and it was a great opportunity to work in an issue I care about with students, which is also something I enjoy greatly. We decided, my husband Lynn and I decided we really wanted to return to Lawrence. Lawrence called, as it does for many of us. Once Jayhawks get in your blood, you return often, and was fortunate enough to get a position at the Emily Taylor, then Women's Resource Center. And it has been a truly meaningful, important part of my life. And I have been at KU this last round since 1998. So many of the things I'll talk about today, I have experienced directly since 1998, and maybe a little bit at other times during my other times here. The other things to mention, I've been on a lot of both local and national boards. I've worked closely with many in the community over the years. It's been really an important part of my experience here. So I think I'll leave it at that.
All right.
And hi, I'm Kathryn Nemeth Tuttle, and Kathy and I are longtime colleagues and partners in crime, if you will,
Yes.
on women's issues. She, her, hers, and I grew up in Western Kansas in a little town called Oberlin on Highway 36 on your way to the Great Rockies. And I came down to KU in the good years, 1968 to 1972, when we were having protests almost every week. So it was, needless to say, quite eye-opening for me. And I still remember the first women's studies type of course, although the department had not started, and having my eyes opened about advertising around women in the 1970s, which was, I was very ignorant, and now I saw the light. I've been back and forth, lived in California, have a son, and but like Kathy, I was drawn back to KU, finished my doctorate, and then at KU I was there for 25 years, from about 1987 to 2013, where I worked mostly with academic support for students, orientation, academic advising, student persistence. But meanwhile, my research interest was in the history of women in higher education. So I've done a fair amount of work on that, studied Emily Taylor, studied other women deans, studied my more recent interest, since I'm on the board at the Watkins Museum of History, is Lawrence women in the 19th and 20th centuries. And I'll say something about that. I know that that wasn't what you were thinking, but as I got to thinking about it, we've had a tradition of strong women in this community for decades. So I'll talk about that. So now I'm retired.
It's an important part. Yes.
And, I live in Old West Lawrence, and with our 2 dogs who I've shut away so they won't bark ceaselessly. And we now have 6 grandchildren. So that keeps me pretty occupied.
I should mention that I recently retired, and I am doing research and have written a book on the Lawrence Gay Liberation Front, and a lot of research on the LGBTQ plus community, and have a book in the wings with the publisher right now on that topic. So I will be speaking about that as well today.
Yeah, we'd definitely love to hear more about that. And I think it's such an important part of the history, again, both of the community and of the organization. Well,
agreed. Very connected.
Exactly. I appreciate you both being here. It is the 45th anniversary this year of the Willow, and so I'm doing some projects around that, including later on in the year we're going to do a freestanding exhibit at Watkins. I'm very excited about that. That'll be in August. But I wanted to kind of use Women's History Month as a chance to kind of tie in the Willow, the women's movement in Lawrence, and put that all together. So would you mind giving us a bit of background on the women's movement here in Lawrence and at the local level? And I guess you can go back as far as you like. I like the idea of historical important women too. So let's go back if we want to, and kind of bring us all the way up to speed.
Yeah, I'd like Kathryn to start. Yeah,
it's 2 minutes on this, but I apologize, because I think that a lot of people think, what are you talking about the 19th century for? But I really do think Lawrence has a context of this. I mean, we had the first, what was then called Rape Victim Support Services, 1972, and Willow came around in 1976, also the first in Kansas. Why is that happening in Lawrence? Well, it's not just KU. We have a context of strong women, and in our community, probably the very first one was Sarah Robinson, who was the wife of the first governor of Kansas. And while her house was looted by guerrilla warfare in 1856, the first sacking of Lawrence, she was writing a book about Kansas and anti-slavery movement. And her book became really the second most important book after Uncle Tom's Cabin. So we have those kind of women. We have Elizabeth Watkins, who used her immense wealth to donate the Watkins building to the community, to build a hospital in Lawrence, to build a hospital on campus. Her effect is very profound. And then I thought it was especially, I should also mention the widows who survived Quantrill's raid formed quite an important basis for our education. The first 3 librarians at the Lawrence Public Library were widows of Quantrill's raid and saw their husbands killed in front of them. And in fact, the 4th one, who took over when it was the Carnegie Library, she was an infant and experienced the Quantrill's raid. So we have that. But I thought I should bring up another more recent philanthropist, Tinsy Oldfather. She donated $4 million to start the Douglas County Community Foundation. And the Willow is one of the organizations that it supports. as well as a pass through for funds that you don't get. And it's very important in our community. So those are just a few of the women. And I think they probably would have defined themselves as feminist. Another important thing, this goes back just a little bit, but Douglas County was a center for the women's suffrage movement in Kansas. I mean, we were pushing hard to get the right to vote. We finally got it in 1912. And many of those women, in fact, were linked to the temperance movement, and people may wrinkle their nose about, why are you forcing us not to drink? But a big argument about that was, in fact, domestic abuse. I mean, they were fighting against alcoholism because they saw fellow women being beaten up by their husbands. So that had a kind of lineage in a way that still comes through today in terms of concern about women's health and safety. So anyway, those just a few historical things. I'll let Kathy take it from here and chime in about what we see as, the more traditional women's movement that, if you call it that, in the 60s and 70s.
And I would say that we had such a diverse group in Lawrence. There were certainly the more progressive women, and there were a lot of very conservative women. And so to imagine it was a separate, discrete group doesn't quite characterize it properly. I think it was more organic. There were a number of women's organizations that were active during that time and continued, but I wouldn't say they were the real prime movers in the change and the push up against some of the conservative, restrictive regulations and attitudes. It was really more the grassroots group, which oftentimes that comes up through the student group and the academic group. But there were a lot of people in town that were very involved with what was then WTCS. And there were activities going on in the late 60s. I'm going to talk a little bit about Willow/WTCS, and I'm going to go back to more general, who were really in there trying to address the ongoing problems. And there was an informal group of women that would host women sometimes in their own home as for women who were actively in a domestic violence situation, but also were trying to secure resources and funding. So that happened before WTCS even got started. I would say another thing to mention is the counterculture was really very involved in Lawrence in the late 60s. A lot of women were part of that. And particularly with the anti-war movement and with civil rights movement, there was a lot of activity in Lawrence. There was no active gay liberation group, public gay liberation group prior to the 1970s, but the people concerned about these issues tended to get channeled through these other organizations. There was a tight connection within the more progressive/radical community, except for radical lesbians who advocated for no male presence, or people who were among men did not advocate for that group being in their group. But the women who were in the activist mode were concerned about the environment for women during that time, sexism, inequity, sexual abuse, and they tended to gather together on issues. It was more issue focused than philosophical planning and movement forward. There was a generational divide. I think within the lesbian community, the older women, and probably among some radical women who were uncomfortable with the very focused visibility of the younger women. And so that created a little bit of friction. But there was action in the late 60s. Talk began about creating a community women's center, sort of like what was happening on campus through the Dean of Women's Office. But in the late 70s, 1979, that actually came to pass. And there was a house on Rhode Island Street that was purchased by Susan Davis, and it functioned like a women's center. There were classes, they had services available. There was some friction about the role of sexual violence and domestic abuse, in that a group of women wanted domestic abuse survivors to be able to stay at the house. There was a group of women who were doing an internship through the School of Social Welfare who had more training to be able to say that's unsafe, we can't do that. And so that group persisted and won, but there were hard feelings about that in the late 70s, in that some people felt WTCS should be able to function out of that house in that. But the right thing happened, because you all got actual shelters, which is far safer than operating out of a unprotected house. So I think that's good to take us further questions.
All right, that's great. Thank you so much. I have to say, this is wonderful. I'm a bit of a history buff, and I of course love local history. So this is kind of fantastic. And I think certainly my new favorite trivia quote is that the first 30 librarians from the Lawrence Public Library were all Quantrell's Raid widows. That's pretty amazing. But it's interesting. I was given an article about the original shelter in San Francisco and the women's movement that evolved, the community that evolved from. And something that struck me was just the kind of punk rock nature of it all, of putting it all together and really wanting it to have kind of no hierarchy and be a collective, and very much have a political face and have a meaningful to be effective, but not to be that hierarchical or patriarchal. So it's kind of fascinating to me to hear how some of this kind of evolved out of that same kind of spirit, it seems like. And based on that, what would you all say are some of the defining moments of the women's movement here in our community?
Well, we'll be talking about maybe this at the end, but we certainly want to highlight the 50th anniversary of the February Sisters, and in 1972, and we can talk more about that. But that obviously that was a campus event, but I hope that there was and is some spillover into the community with their demands for childcare, affirmative action, a women's studies program, women administrators, women's healthcare. The healthcare piece, and Kathy can maybe address this as well, was really part of the community issue. And when we talk about women being involved, there was a group of women, older women, who were trying to be helpful to KU students regarding birth control, because in the 60s, birth control had been legal for a while, but it was not available to unmarried women. And there were actually laws against that. But finally, in the community, and the Douglas County Health Department started giving out birth control in 1966 to unmarried women, which at the time was considered, radical, right, Kathy? And so, but what was happening up on campus? They were moralizing about it, saying they weren't going to support immorality of their female students on campus. And it wasn't until the action of the February Sisters that birth control became available for unmarried women on campus in 1972. So I think, from both equity issues for personal health, for financial health, for the rules that govern us, that was very symbolic. And it's something that sometimes it gets lost in the shuffle, is that it wasn't just faculty and students, it was also staff people who were working were very low salaries under classified systems that were completely unfair to women. And they had a big role in that too. And one of those women, Christine Smith, will be talking at our panel, and I can give you more details about the events at the end here.
And I would add on to that, the presentation by Robin Morgan, the author, was really important for, I'll just keep calling you the Willow rather than do the /WTCS, but knowing back then, that's what it was, WTCS.
Yeah, I suppose we should probably throw in a disclaimer for anybody who doesn't know that history, that it was Women's Transitional Care Services up to 2012, I believe. And then it became the Willow in 2012.
Anyways, that is really what spurred on the hearing Robin Morgan is what spurred on discussions about creating Woman's Space, which was the community women's center. It had been talked about before then, but right after that presentation is when the conversations came up again in the community. So it was important in so many ways, not just for students. I would add a couple of other things. I would say there was a woman named Susan Davis. She still is around, so I shouldn't say was. She came to Lawrence in the early 70s and became a very important figure in town. Many people don't know of her, but she purchased a house which she used as a gathering spot for feminists and lesbians. And there really wasn't a central meeting spot, and that was a place people gathered. And a lot of these discussions happened at Susan Davis's house. And again, she's still around and still in Lawrence, still doing great things. So I think that was really important. In the 80s, there was a place called Spinster's Bookstore, which was also very influential. It was on the second floor of one of the buildings on Mass Street. And it also served like a meeting, drawing people in space. But it did sell books as well. So, and I would say Emily Taylor had a significant role in the work that she did. Even though it was focused on students, it certainly impacted staff, faculty, and the community as well. So particularly removing parietal rules, some of the issues she brought up regarding equity were essential for discussions going on in the community. I'm going to pass it on to Kathryn so she can say more about that.
Well, regarding Emily, she started the first 1958. We think about the 50s as a time when nothing was happening, but it was building towards something, and it was building towards some of these actions by women, and that was extremely important. She was also very interested in women's employment and expanding opportunities for women in the workplace, in different jobs, of course, their education. Some other early things that happened, and this is more around safety issues and sexual assault issues. In 1965, there were complaints that were showing up in the UDK, student newspaper, about how poorly lit the campus was and how it was unsafe for women to be walking around at night. They put in an appeal for extra funding, and the grounds department turned it down because they needed it for more landscaping. This was 1968, but students were persistent, and this built toward the 1997 campus safety fee. I don't know if it still exists, but students were willing to pay out of their pocket for safety. They started this blue light system, which of course with cell phones is no longer needed, but at the time is extremely important. And they also got funding from the city to light 12th Street. So that walkway down 12th Street from campus to downtown was women concerned about safety. I think another event going back though was 1974 and the Whistle Stop campaign. And this did operate out of Dean Emily's area. Was she, I don't know about, I've got my dates messed up here in terms of when she actually left, but it was out of the Dean of Women's office. And it was to raise awareness about rape. And you may not think of that as something that's so dramatic, but at the time it just was not being done. And they had these plastic whistles that they were handing out so women could alert people if they were afraid. And many entities, I won't get too specific about it, at KU were very concerned about this. They thought it gave us a bad reputation and people would be worried about sending their daughters here. Kayla Stroop was one of the important people to implement that. But there's a growing awareness about violence toward women, and it was being talked about in a way that it hadn't been before.
And there was a lot of animosity, and Emily Taylor was not supported at that level for her work. And she was actually, I think, cautioned to stop it. Yeah.
Interesting. Well, I think that's a really good segue into my next question, and I feel like we've gone over parts of it, but I think it's if we could just kind of address it as a whole here. You know, you stated earlier, Kathryn, that Lawrence would probably have still been as profoundly involved in the movement even without the university. But we've also talked about Emily Taylor being such an important figure and being tied to the university. I guess my question is, where does the university fall in terms of helping drive the movement? Do you think there's a relationship between, because we always get that sort of schism relationship between the university and the town and how they both intersect with each other and kind of pull back from each other. So I guess I'm just wondering, in a Lawrence without a university, would it have evolved the same way? Would it have been different? And how has the university impacted the women's movement in Lawrence?
My opinion is clearly not. I think it's intimately involved. I think it's just intimately involved, and there are traditionally schisms between town and gown. I don't think they're as bad actually in Lawrence at KU as in some places, but the kind of intellectual discussion, people crossing over between living in Lawrence and I mean, I don't know, Kathy, what you found in your studies, but I would say a number of people that continued their work in the community had some connection to KU. Maybe they took some classes, or they graduated, or they worked, or I just don't think we would have been nearly as progressive, frankly, without those kind of notions coming from California and the West Coast and the East Coast and coming here. I mean, look at Salina. It's a little different kind of town. It's a wonderful town, but I just think that that's my opinion, that the effect was very profound. There actually had been work done prior to the February Sisters by faculty women at KU. And they found that faculty salaries, for example, were almost twice as much for men as they were for female professors. And female professors were only 10% of the whole population. And this was just prior to the February Sisters, around 1971. So I think it was profound, and I think it continues to this day. But Kathy, give your thoughts on that.
I would second that. And I think without the push from within the university, we would have remained a nice, maybe sleepy, maybe slightly progressive little town in the middle of the Midwest. But I think with the advocacy and the activism that was going on within the student body, it really stirred up, and it brought in a lot of people. The university brought in a lot of people. It was known for its radicalism. Current students may be surprised to hear that, but it was considered similar to Berkeley in some ways. It was called the Berkeley of the Midwest. In many
And
accounts,
people that were
I've
going
seen it.
cross country would come up for air and Lawrence, they were heading out to Berkeley. They were
I
coming
know.
from Cambridge or something. That was really true of we had our own special brand of hippiedom. I mean, if you've seen that book, Cows Are Crazy When They Look at You, you really understand that a little better. But
Yeah.
we had this kind of, rural hippiedom, but it was definitely influenced by all these smart people coming here.
And I think the counterculture, which included students and community, and the draw in bringing more progressive, radical people to the campus, allowed some of the progressive people in the town to be freer to join in, whereas it might have been a lot harder if there was a more conservative overlay in general. So I think it was very important. Plus, like Kathryn said, bringing in new ideas and having data-backed information on a lot of this stuff. Like, for instance, in the 60s and 70s, there began to be challenges to a lot of the sexual violence laws. And in the 80s, some of those laws were changed, thank goodness. It used to be you had to prove you were raped in order to charge rape. And you had to show that you physically resisted. So thankfully, there wasn't a term until the mid-80s. Acquaintance rape wasn't a term. And the issues related to, can a woman be raped by her husband? Those were considered, no, that can't happen. So a lot of the changes to the laws, some of those were, of course, national, but the upheaval going on campus helped push some of those changes along.
Thank you. I just want to remind everybody who's watching that if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the comments below. If you don't feel comfortable asking directly, you either email me. My email is in the comments below, and you can email me at wavril@willowdvcenter.org. And once again, if you need help or assistance, you can give us a call at 785-843-3333. One of the things that I've been preparing as we've been working towards this 45th anniversary show has been kind of physical artifacts of the Willow and work that's been done at the Willow. And one of those that I came across the other day was the red shoe from Walk a Mile and their shoe calendar, which was a huge event that the Willow did about 10 years ago, I think. And then I was thinking back to like Bras on the Caw and Women Take Back the Night and some of the other kind of, and most recently, the Women's Day marches, some of those events. And I was just wondering, are there other events in that sort of vein that I'm not thinking of, but that were important, or other events that kind of happened that were in that same vein?
Kathryn has a great story.
Yes, this is from Christine Smith, who is one of the original February Sisters and who will be at our panel on April 5th. But she shared this story. On Saturday, January 20th, 2018, the February Sisters hosted a women's march in Lawrence, Kansas. And some of them had been at that original huge march in 2017 after Trump was elected. But they decided the next year to do it again. And they thought, well, we'll have about 25 people. They had RSVPs from people. They saw the numbers were going to 50. So they thought they better let the police know. And they explained that 1,000 people had said they were coming. And the police had said, stay on the sidewalks and obey the traffic lights. And in the end, 2,500 people were there. And this was in January of 2018.
Wow.
And they went all the way down and back, and people were still leaving South Park. So that shows you the continuing activism of many of these February Sisters, but also just the heightened concern about women's issues in that environment. And to get that kind of turnout, it's really phenomenal. But that's also some of the beauty of Lawrence, I guess, that we would get that kind of turnout.
Yeah.
That's one recent thing that I'm a more recent thing that I'm aware of, in addition to the things. But you're right. It's so interesting, Will, to think about this notion of physical artifacts in this circumstance, and what that means in terms of the women's issues, and issues for domestic violence and sexual violence. So it's I think they can be pretty powerful, and if you can find some things that work.
I think there have been some really large notable things like you discussed. Also, KU, I'm so pleased to say, at the Emily Taylor Center for Women and Gender Equity, which has been its name since 2012, rather than Women's Resource Center, which was when I came on board. We did a lot of ongoing programs. For instance, we created a program after the murder of Jana Mackey, which was so tragic, a law student at KU, an advocate, and who had worked with Willow, who had worked with what was then RVSS, worked with this at the Capitol on domestic violence issues, who was murdered by her boyfriend. It goes to show you can't label people, oh, there is what a sexual violence survivor looks like, or these are the people that will be on the receiving end of these kinds of issues. It can happen to anybody. But we created a lecture that has been going on now since, I believe, 2014, maybe, no. It's been longer than that. Quite a number of years where we have featured important speakers on issues related to women and women's equity. And we've had a really good collaboration with the community on that. We have a lot of other ongoing programs that we have offered through the ETC. I say we, like I'm still there. I retired in 2019, but part of me is always still there. So I think that there's also, though, the smaller actions which are important to mention. It doesn't have to be a big, notable signature event to be important. The tabling that happens, the small events that happen with particular bills and legislation that people meet up in South Park. I think those are really important too.
Absolutely. I think tabling is one of those. I very much enjoy it as a director of communications. I get set out a lot on tabling, and it's always very good to be able to speak with people directly on a one-to-one level in a format that you have some time to talk to them. It's always super handy. Well, hey, we are approaching sort of the end. This conversation is, I feel like we could have a whole chorus over what we're talking about here. And this has been so wonderful, but I really do want to give you a chance to kind of talk about the upcoming panel and anything that you want to kind of shout out. So tell us what's next. What are you all working on?
I would say, please come, get your calendar out while Kathryn is talking. Go.
Well, we, as you can see, we can go on, and maybe we restricted ourselves by doing 4 panels, but we are doing 4 different events. But this is a momentous thing because it really was a watershed for women in our community. So the first event will be on Tuesday, April 5th, and all of the programs will start at 6:30. And with one exception, all of them will be in the Centennial Room of the Kansas Union, which is on level 5. So the first one is an opening panel that will include women who were involved directly with the February Sisters Action. I mentioned Christine Smith, Elizabeth Schultz, who's an English professor, well-known in the community, who was involved in supporting Joe Anderson, who later served on the city commission, was the official babysitter. That's, women thought about these things when they were organizing this. They were very organized, and they had lots of food, and they had babysitters, and it was great. And also Shanette Alexander, but virtually we're going to have Robin Morgan. So she was the one who started the whole thing with her talk on February 2nd, 1972. And so she'll be joining us virtually, the poet and feminist Robin Morgan. Then on April 7th, we're going to have one that focuses on politics, listening to all the voices, women in politics. And this one is going to be at the Public Library Auditorium. And we're going to have Kathleen Sebelius, former Health and Human Services Secretary and former Kansas governor, of course. We're going to have on a recorded video, Sharice Davids, the representative from the 3rd District. We're going to have, I should have all these notes in front of me. Now there are some of the names are slipping me. We're going to have Sandy Prager, who served key roles in the federal and community government. And then Christina Haswood. I don't know if you read the New York Times, but they just had a piece on Twitter and politicians. And Christina Haswood was featured because she has a TikTok account. I'm sorry, not Twitter. She has a TikTok account that helped with her election, but hopefully she'll be there as well. Then on the April 12th, Kathy will be moderating We Demand, the call for healthcare, childcare, affirmative action, and leadership reforms at KU. And these are some of the very dramatic demands that were made, but also dramatic in terms of something happened. There were results. I mean, it really was, in a way, one of the most successful protests ever on the KU campus in terms of what came with that. We'll have current and former directors of Hilltop, healthcare leaders, Kelly Sartorius, who's done a book on Emily Taylor. Help me, Kathy, who are some of the other
Beth
members?
Bailey, who
Beth
has
Bailey,
written on these issues.
And sexuality, sex in the heartland. And then on the 14th, we want to hear from current students. So 50 years later, current student activism at KU. So we'll wrap up with that. For all the hungry people out there, the first opening panel will have refreshments at the end. So please join us 6:30 at the Kansas Union on 3 of the days. And then on the 7th, we'll be at the public library.
Is there a website that folks can go to get all those dates again? Because I could throw that on the,
Yes.
on the
Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies, I believe, has it. Is that right? And the Emily Taylor Center for, won't they both have them, Kathy?
Yes. And the easiest one to remember is wgs.ku.edu. And so somebody can go on there and everything is listed. And if you would like to either, if you want to stream, these will be recorded and they will be live streamed. And to sign up to live stream, you go to that WGS website.
WGSS, right?
Oh, yes, yes.
WGSS, not KU.
WGSS, okay.
Yeah.
I just really wanted a shortcut there.
Any and I always like to end it with a chance for people to do personal shout outs, because it's kind of fun. Anyone or anything that you're doing, that you're working on, or that you want to give some credit or kudos to. Any shout outs today?
I have one quick thing I wanted to mention. Last October, we did an event called 51 Years Out. It was celebrating gay liberation at KU, gay liberation and lesbian activism at KU and in the Lawrence community. And we taped all the sessions, and they are all available to watch. They are all fabulous at the Sexuality and Gender Diversity Center website, which is sgd.ku.edu. And I know I got that one right. All the initials are correct. And I really encourage people to watch. There's also a film short. It's 15 minutes, 14 minutes actually. We worked with a journalism class to make a short documentary. It is awesome. And it's called Liberate LFK. And it is being featured in the Free State Film Festival. So
nice.
go on that site. The video will blow you away. It did me, and it's worth the time. Kathryn, anything you want to?
Okay, I think you
you're
mentioned that
always
Sarah
doing.
Smarts will be here for the I think you mentioned Sarah Schmarz will be here for the Paper Plains Literary Festival.
Yes.
A week from Saturday, is that the 9th? And then I do a shout out for the Watkins Museum of History, which is having a really interesting exhibit on women entrepreneurs in Lawrence, mostly in the 19th and early 20th centuries. And I think that's just coming up and just available. So check out the Watkins Museum of History.
I also want to throw out that the Emily Taylor Center for Women and Gender Equity is doing some really great work. You can go on the website and there are opportunities for community members to get involved. Megan Williams, who is the assistant director, has an expertise in doing zines, really
nice.
cool. And I believe anybody can sign up to participate in those workshops. There's a whole list of them for this month.
Awesome. I'll make sure to get that link on the comments when we put the YouTube up of this, so that folks can follow that. Well, thank you both so much. This has been a wonderful and enlightening conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today. And I look forward to, I'm definitely going to attend some of these panels and look forward to learning more about the February Sisters and more about the history of women in Lawrence. So thank you so much for coming and sharing your time.
Thank you for having us, Will.
Thank you.
All right. Have a great one.
You too.